So it is live. What we do is we'll wait for people to arrive and then we'll start at midday. I just want to check it's live on LinkedIn. Aha, right, click to join live. Oh, it's working on LinkedIn, happy days. That's good. Right, welcome people that may or may not be here. We'll leave it 4 minutes just for people to arrive and get settled. But yeah, feel free to get a drink or etc. And we'll start at midday. I think it's working on LinkedIn. Yeah, we've got 3 people online. Just yeah, it's working. I think, thankfully. Pop something in the chat if you can hear us and see us. To say hello. Be good to hear from people. We're going to start at midday. Just get everything set up on YouTube and LinkedIn. Yeah, we're live on YouTube. Good. Cool. Everything seems to be working fine. If we don't breathe and don't knock anything over, it should be fine. There's touch wood. We've not hit any bumps in the road yet.
Oh no.
I've said it now.
I don't know if it's just me, Cole, but your screen keeps going funny.
Is it flickering?
Like Max Headroom.
Pardon?
Like Max Headroom.
Right, does it keep flickering?
No, I don't. Yeah, it might just be my end. I don't know if it's happening.
No, I think it is. Something's gone a bit skew whiff with it. Not ideal, is it? 1 minute before you're about to start, but there we are.
Things all right now.
Yeah, I just have to play it by ear, and I think there might be something up with the camera. I'm going back to Amazon, unfortunately. Yeah, we'll give it 1 more minute. Oh, we've got 3 people watching on YouTube. A very slowly growing channel. Right. Yeah, drop us if you're. Remove this. Cool. Right, we'll make a start, shall we? Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the School to Prison Evidence Project podcast. In this episode, we're going to look at the role of appropriate adults in the criminal justice process, and we're really grateful for Chris for joining us and giving us his time. The School to Prison Evidence Pipeline project is basically a project where we gather evidence, we use data and lived experience to help sort of inform professionals and bring people together to share their stories, and hopefully over time we're going to grow an evidence base of information that we can use to support the points that we're trying to make. So yeah, thank you, Chris, for joining us. Chris is the Chief Executive of the National Appropriate Adult Network. He's a specialist in relation to children and vulnerable people that in policing and criminal justice. So Chris, without further ado, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself, because you'll do a better job than I will.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. Never mind thanking me for being here. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to people about appropriate adult. So yeah, Chris Barth, Chief Executive, National Appropriate Adult Network, which is a small but national charity that acts as kind of a centre of expertise for the appropriate adult role. So we're small in the sense that we have kind of 3 members of staff, but we have over 100 organisations that are members of ours, and they would typically be the organisations kind of providing organised appropriate adult services, but also some commissioners and academics and various other people as well. But it started as just as an informal practitioner network in the mid-90s of people who, mostly then social workers, who wanted to, I guess, understand what good looks like for appropriate adults, share best practice, not reinvent the wheel across the country. And then it became a registered charity, and yeah, we're celebrating 30 years this year with the network.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a long old time, isn't it, for something that started as a, you know, an informal network, and that just goes to show you the power of bringing people together that, you know, really care about that sort of work. So yeah, so in this episode we really wanted to sort of explore a topic that, you know, my time in policing, I wasn't taught a lot about appropriate adults, and I look back on that time in policing and I think that actually the role of appropriate adults in communication, I think that in policing maybe we didn't use them enough and we didn't understand them enough. And also I'd like to sort of explore the topic of how we could use them better. So Chris, if we're looking at like what is an appropriate adult in a nutshell? What is it? If you don't understand anything about an appropriate adult, what would someone, you know, what would you tell someone?
Well, in a nutshell, assuming we'll unpack this slightly more, it's somebody who supports either a child or somebody who has some additional needs when they are a suspect, either been detained by the police in custody or they've attended a voluntary interview in a bid to make the system fairer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Can I ask, Chris, who assesses the vulnerability, if you like?
So yeah, I mean, we should have a whole conversation really about what that word even means, because it's a slightly odd word. But to answer your specific question, it is the legal responsibility of the custody officer, so a police sergeant, to determine whether the law requires an appropriate adult to be applied. Again, we can talk a bit more about the process by how they do that, but that's the straight answer. It's a police determination.
So if we're looking, I guess a good way to go through from what an appropriate adult is to how they're used, and the definition of vulnerability. What would good practice look like for you if we're looking at, you know, if you don't mind, if you could provide us a scenario of someone who would be vulnerable by definition potentially, and then what you would like to see through that process. Like if someone's brought into custody, what would the role of the appropriate adult be, and how would they best, you know, what would best practice be for that appropriate adult in custody with communicating with the police? Just maybe the start of the journey of when an appropriate adult would be considered and what exactly their role is.
So I think the thing starts with what that word vulnerability means, and the reality of that word means loads of different things to loads of different people, and we all bring our own baggage to that depending on our life experiences, our own personal experiences, the experiences of the people around us, stuff we've watched on telly, books we've read, you know, that we bring a lot to that. And actually, even within policing, that word means loads of different things to different people. So it means a different thing to a response officer, to a custody officer, means something different when as a police officer is thinking about sort of victims and safeguarding versus the suspect. And so I think it's when we start using that word, which is a massively loaded word, first of all, it's helpful to be really precise about it. So whenever we use the word vulnerable, we should certainly clarify that with to what, vulnerable to what thing. we have to recognise that it's not just about kind of internal characteristics, it's also about the external, the sort of circumstance that we're talking about. We have to recognise that it's not just people who are vulnerable, it's also systems can be vulnerable. Also that vulnerability is not a binary thing, right? So I find it quite interesting that we have a category in law that's called vulnerable people, which kind of implies that in the Venn diagram, everyone who sits out that is some sort of invulnerable,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, even Superman's got, even Superman's got kryptonite, right? So yeah, who's invulnerable?
That's a good point. Yeah, I like that.
So and also that can vary up and down and in different contexts, right? So if someone's pointing a gun at my head, I'm vulnerable. You know, they take the gun away, that I'm slightly less vulnerable, but maybe it's still a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
Or in the context of ADHD, for example, not at all vulnerable in situation A, actually really nailing it, and then in situation B, super vulnerable, right? So it's vulnerable to what and in context. So
can I jump in there, Chris? Because speaking from lived experience, obviously Cole mentioned about how the police probably didn't utilise AAs or don't utilise AAs enough. But from my side of the fence, or my side of the cell door, if you like, I found it. I've had an AA in the past a couple of times, but I found it quite offensive that I was being deemed vulnerable, because it's like, hold on a minute, I've been through this game more times than not, and I kind of know the way to play the game in the police station, if you like. So being given an AA, in my opinion, as I say, I felt quite offended by it at some points.
Yeah, you're not the only one, and I think the police also come at it from a similar perspective, which is they're not vulnerable. They've been through here so many times, they know their rights and the process is better than I do. So how can they be vulnerable? As I say, I think that word is massively loaded. I guess my question back to you would be, did it feel insulting because it seemed like it was saying maybe you were childlike or you were deficient in some way? And if the language was different, would that make a difference to you?
I mean, it was a long time ago. I haven't been arrested for 10 years now. So it was a long time ago. And to be honest, they played such an... Although I was offended at being classed as vulnerable in a police station, I didn't really connect or found the AA to be significant in that part of my journey anyway. For me, they just sat in the corner taking notes and that was it. And to be honest, I didn't really understand or know what they were about, other than being told it's been decided that you need an AA because of basically down to mental health issues. But as I say, I mean, I didn't feel as if they had any power. It just felt like, for want of another word, a voyeur. Just like, I don't know. Yeah,
what's the
I
point?
didn't feel that they had the power to intervene on my behalf or anything like that. But as I say, it was never really fully explained to me what an AA does or what an AA is. However, my goal was either to get out of the police station as soon as I possibly could, or 9 times out of 10 it's going to go against me and I wouldn't get bail, get me to court and get me to prison so I can settle down.
Yeah.
So kind of, as I say, it became a game in the police station. Very, very rarely would I give a statement. It would either be prepared through my solicitor, or I'd give a no comment interview, and 9 times out of 10 they're without a solicitor, because again it's about having to wait about for a junior solicitor or your solicitor. So again, it's about getting things done as quickly as possible. And even if you took a phone call with a solicitor, I could go into the interview and say, after taking legal advice from my solicitor, I'm going to give a no comment interview to kind of, in a way, cover myself. So that's where I kind of took the offence at being, but I knew what I was doing in the police interview. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's where I felt the kind of offence came in.
Yeah, I think you've raised loads of really interesting issues, and we might, helpfully touch back on that as we
Yeah.
talk about the definition of vulnerability. But I would say, I mean, that's a really bad experience of appropriate adults. I'm not massively surprised because there's quite a bit of evidence that's a bit historic now about AAs, which talks a lot, particularly about lack of interventions in interviews, like not saying something when they ought to have interrupted. And I think it's something that I think we've gone a long way to tackle now, but there's still issues around this, that you get situations where neither the appropriate adult nor the person they're supporting, nor the police officer really understands what the role of the appropriate adult is, in which case that's arguably worse than having no safeguard at all, because it's got the box ticked of a safeguard that isn't actually the case. I think if you, and to go back to that language thing, I think that because appropriate adults are to an extent associated with children, so it's got the word appropriate in it, which maybe kind of implies that you as the individual being supported are not appropriate. And it's got the word adult in it, which kind of maybe gets read by people as suggesting that they're not adult in some way, which is obviously not right. My feeling is that if we found a different language for it, and also everybody understood what the actual purpose of it was, then that might be different. But I think it's a pretty regular experience of AAs today that they will arrive at custody and the person will be pretty angry, like reject them, why are you here, I don't need you, etc., etc. And there's a skill in then explaining what the function is, and to go back to your point about what your priorities were, like fast out, how the AA role links back to people's priorities. And in some cases it is about creating the space to zoom out a little bit on priorities. It might not have been the case in your case, but for some people that fast out priority is a major point of risk, because if your main priority is just to get out, then it could well be that you admit to stuff you haven't done because your priority is to get it over and done with.
I think that what I'm hearing from the points that both of you are making, and sorry, I've just turned my camera off for a minute because I'm trying to sort that horrible flickering out for people, is that, like, there's a couple of questions there. Who decides when an AA is appropriate?
Yeah.
And then what is the responsibility? What would you expect, Chris, of the conduct of an AA in that setting? Like, what would you expect best practice from an AA to support someone in that custody process? What would they be expected to do?
Okay, so let's cap off the vulnerability point, and then we'll talk specifically about the AA as well, because we've kind of got to understand what the risks are we're trying to mitigate before we talk about how we're going to mitigate those risks. So this, I call it PACE vulnerability, to try and be specific, but this specific thing that we're talking about, the definition of who's vulnerable in this context is really well evidenced, but it's also really complex. It's not based on a list of conditions or diagnoses. It's a sort of functional definition. It's about the individual case by case thing. So anybody who might have difficulty understanding or communicating effectively about the full implications for them of anything that happens, any procedures, any processes, or someone who doesn't appear to understand the significance of what they're told. So not just understanding what they're told, but understanding why it's significant, any questions they're asked, and of their own replies as well. So what are the implications? What are the consequences?
Yeah.
Or they appear to be particularly prone to a number of things. Confusion, sort of being unclear about their position, unintentionally providing information that's unreliable or misleading or self-incriminating, being suggestible, which is a sort of psychological phenomena around starting to incorporate things that other people have said into your own responses, or just readily agreeing to suggestions and proposals that people make without any kind of protest or question, like acquiescence. They're just like, yeah, okay, if you say so, type stuff. So the important thing is it's not just about whether someone understands what the police are saying. or whether someone like knows who they are and where they are and what day it is. People need to understand their rights. They need to understand the consequences of what they decide to say. If we ask them some questions about that police caution thing, the police just said, oh, you don't have to say anything, blah, 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 blah. If I ask them some questions about that, would they be able to like accurately answer it? Do they know what their rights are? Can they think clearly in the specific context? So bear in mind that how your mind works when you're being assessed by a nurse, even a custody nurse, might be quite different to when you're 40 minutes into an interview for murder. Are they at risk of creating false memories unintentionally? Are they starting to incorporate things the police have said into their answers? Are they just agreeing to whatever because they want to avoid conflict, or they want to get out of custody and get it over and done with, right? So it's all very complex. The thing that I think helps to simplify it a bit is that police officers are not being asked to work out whether someone is place vulnerable or not, because that's actually not possible for a police officer skill set in the custody. It's not even possible for a forensic psychiatrist or a psychologist in terms of the amount of time they'd have, right? What they're being asked to determine by the law is there any reason to suspect that the person in front of them might be, maybe, a vulnerable person, right? So, that is a police officer responsibility, but the law requires them to have made reasonable efforts to work out what information is available to help them make that determination. So what the person says about themselves, have their family provided some information, what do our own police records show, what medical information, what social care information is available, speak to the healthcare professional. In England, speak to the liaison diversion. I think Wales has a criminal justice liaison diversion scheme as well. So that's how it's supposed to work. In practice, of course, there's pretty much no training for police officers. The risk assessment questions are not fit for this particular purpose. The police are assuming that the healthcare professionals know better than they do because they're health professionals, but that is an assumption because not everybody has all the skills. So sometimes they kind of defer to the healthcare professional rather than referring to them. And if I'm completely honest, police culture is quite cynical about what people in custody say about themselves.
So that's right.
And there are a lot of pressures in custody. The pace clock's running down. Maybe there's not enough appropriate adults. You're feeling like you need to triage which cases and individuals get the AA. So that is very much an imperfect system. So that's, in a nutshell, what vulnerability is, what the police are being asked to do, and whose responsibility it is. I'm just going to pause there before we talk about what I'd expect from the AA. Does that make sense?
Oh, it really does. And I can't seem to sort my camera out, so it'll keep flickering. I do apologise. But what I hear from that as well is that it's better to err on the side of caution if you're unsure that someone may be vulnerable, because you're making a decision in custody, as you say, that don't receive training, and we're not equipped to be making decisions as to whether someone is definitely vulnerable or not. So if you have an inkling that they are, then you should be making every effort possible to obtain an appropriate adult. And what do you think the risks are, Chris, of that, of not getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, we need to differentiate between two things, right? There's the law, and then there's the real world, and then there's how those two things come together. And the reality for police officers is, there's limited availability of appropriate adults. It's not an easy situation.
No.
But just to clarify, I would say the way the law is constructed now, I'm not sure it is an inkling. I think it is there a reason? Is there a reason in front of me to suspect the person may be vulnerable? That is the test in law. If there isn't a reason, fine. If there is a reason, and then there's what the law says, if there's clear evidence to dispel that suspicion, then you can stand down the AA safeguard. But if there's a reason to suspect, then you need to apply the AA safeguard. So to answer your question about I guess it's about what the risks are if we don't do that, or and I mean we in the broadest sense of society, and policing is a part of that. The risks are all those risks set out in the definition of vulnerability, right? It's a functional definition. So if any of those things go wrong, people are confused, they don't understand, they can't use their rights, that generates risk. And the consequences of that are that the person's needs are not met. Nobody makes any adjustments to quite a rigid system. The person's not treated fairly. They don't participate effectively. Their rights and entitlements are not respected. They don't even get to use their rights because they don't even understand them. I mean, that's the first thing. Do you know what they are before you even then start getting into, well, now I know my rights, but do I feel like the power balance is such that I can actually use them? For example, they don't have legal advice. Loads of people, like a 10-year-old can waive their right to free legal advice, as can an adult with additional needs as well. So there's no mandatory legal advice. Where AAs can insist on a lawyer coming to the station. You can't force anybody to take legal advice, but you can press that button, as it were. And
can I quickly jump in there, Chris? Actually, because talking about consent and informed consent, for me, there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm assuming that AAs do not require consent, do they, from the individual that the custody sergeant has considered vulnerable, or do the AAs need consent?
Need consent to do what? Just so I'm clear.
Support an individual within an interview or whatever.
I'm with you.
Through a police station.
It's a really interesting thing. And when you think about, I've spoken to a lot of people about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and this sort of sense that the AA is like help you don't want and you've got no control over that. And what does that sort of mean? The fact is, in law, that the appropriate adult safeguard is an imposition on the police. It's mandatory. It's absolutely mandatory imposition on the police for that AA to be present for loads of the procedures. That is distinct from how an AA would interact with the person they're supporting. So, for example, I as an AA turn up. Have you, David? Have you asked for legal advice? No. Why not? Don't.
Oh, sorry. I thought you was asking me a question.
Let's play it out. Let's try and imagine what we're trying to do. David, did you ask legal advice?
But talking about that there again, though, Chris, and again, consent and informed consent, and what you said about a 10-year-old can turn down legal advice. How is that informed consent?
Well, I mean, it's not, is it?
I mean, obviously, there should be an age where, if you like, consent should not be considered informed consent, and then safeguarding become the priority, and what's done in the best practice for the best interest of the individual should come first, whether or not they've given their consent.
There are loads of things that happen in police custody where you would not want to consent to it necessarily, and the police are going to do it to you anyway. You've had a lot of your power taken away from you in that situation, and the last thing AAs want to do is to be part of that, right? But you're right, it's about there's consent as a very specific context, and then there's just informed decision making. Like, you're free, you're an adult, you can make your own decisions about what you want to do, and you're completely free to make a decision that I think is stupid. Like, it's your life. But my concern is, did you make that from a position of being informed and being in power, basically? So, David, have you asked for legal advice? No. Oh, can you tell me a bit about why that is? Now, my next move is going to be dependent on what you say to me, because if what you say to me is, I haven't got any money, and I then say to you, oh, it's free. In fact, it's not necessarily free at court. This is the only time that you're going to potentially get free legal advice. Oh, okay, I didn't realise that. Maybe I'll change my mind, right? If you say, to be honest, Chris, I've done this 30 times. I know what the advice is going to be. I've already made my decision. Do you know what I mean? Okay. Yeah. Or maybe you say to me, I just want to get out of here as fast as possible. I'm not. If I ask for a lawyer, it'll take 2 hours more, and all I want to do is get out. And then I might have a conversation with you about what the benefits to you are of making that decision in the short term, but what the costs might be a little bit longer term, right? So we might have that back and forth. At the end of that conversation, you might say to me, Chris, I've had the conversation. I've told you I don't want a lawyer. The context might be that the nurse has seen you and told me that you're experiencing psychosis, that your mind is not connected to reality right at this moment. What Code C allows me to do as an appropriate adult is to insist or to request on your behalf a lawyer if I think it's in your best interests, right? What that doesn't mean is that you have to take the legal advice. What it does mean is the police have to call a lawyer as if you've called them.
Right.
The lawyer then has to come to the station. If you then go, I do not want to see that lawyer, then you don't see that lawyer. If you want to see the lawyer but you don't want to take their advice, you see the lawyer but you don't take their advice. It's a little bit more complicated than that because I am exercising a power. I am deciding on your behalf what's in your best interest, which is kind of infringing on your rights potentially. And if the system's massively underfunded like it is, and it takes 2 hours for a lawyer to get there, then you're in custody for 2 hours longer than you would have been. Maybe you're within your rights to be a bit miffed at me. So that's a tricky thing for appropriate adults to then go home and think, did I do the right thing? But in my view, the law says if I think it's in your best interests. I struggle to think of a circumstance in which not having legal advice is a good idea. I mean, you might say, well, if you've done it 1,000 times and you've had the same legal advice, maybe there's some edge cases there and what have you. But generally speaking, having legal advice is, whether you've done it or whether you haven't done it, I think is a better idea than going without. That's personal view.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you still
Yep.
hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, having a bit of a fight with tech. No, it's, those are really, really good points, Chris, and give us an insight into, taking some or understanding vulnerability as a professional, and also then making a choice as how to move forward with that. And I think that one of the key points you said as well that I really want to dig into a little bit is you said about the kind of when an AA is not there or they're not used appropriately is the kind of unintentional actions of a person. Like they might admit liability, or they might say something that impulsively, for example. And then I want to sort of look at now the context of vulnerability as a neurodivergent person in custody and how environment impacts that. Because one of the key things you said at the beginning, and like, if someone holds a gun to your head, actually you're going to become more vulnerable. But one of the things now is that how can we improve our understanding of someone's the way that someone communicates in custody? So if they're autistic and they have challenges with recalling information, but we ask them an open-ended question. So we go to them, right, what did you do today? And well, they jump 10 steps ahead, 5 steps back, 2 steps forward, and the story becomes really confusing for that person interviewing them and also the person giving evidence, and whether that's actually the best evidence that we've captured. And I just want to kind of understand whether or what an AA's role would be within that kind of setting.
I think you're absolutely right. As a consequence of the risks that I was talking about before, the chances are the police are going to get evidence that's not reliable, right? So you could get false confessions, like admitting to a murder you didn't do, which is hard to believe that human beings would do, but evidence shows they do. You also get false denials, right? So, were you in the pub that night? No, I wasn't. Oh, but we found your fingerprints there, so now we think you're lying about the fact you were in the pub, and now we think you're guilty of this completely other offence when you were so scared or whatever, your brain was not operating in the way that it normally does for you, that you've denied something. And then you get miscarriage of justice. You also get failed prosecutions of people who actually have done whatever they're accused of, right? So let's talk about the role of the AA. So the role of the AA is essentially to reduce all of those risks that we've just talked about. It's the flip side to that. So technically, you're safeguarding or protecting the interests of children and what's known as vulnerable people, which, as I've said, is not a term I'm a massive fan of, but their rights, their entitlements, their welfare. And that obviously includes the right to participate effectively in whatever process is, including the interview, but not only the interview. So what the law says is AA's role is, first of all, it goes right across the whole process, right? So it's you had your detention authorised, there's rights and entitlements, having your fingerprints taken, having your photographs taken, being searched, having intimate or non-intimate samples taken from you. Yes, the interview, but then also decisions about whether you're going to be charged or not, whether there's going to be an out-of-court outcome, bail conditions. Do you understand the bail conditions? So I'm totally happy to talk about the interview, but we should also be really clear that there's a much broader picture. And actually, one of my critiques of the academic evidence base looking at how effective AAs are, they've just looked at interview recordings. And my view is that actually AAs shouldn't have to say very much in interviews if they've done their job properly beforehand. So support, advise and assist the person through any procedure, any information they're given, questions they're asked. Yes, assist communication, which involves including respecting the person's right to say nothing. So when David was talking about going no comment, so something that might happen is that a person might get legal advice, agree to the legal advice, decide to go no comment, but then part way through the interview they might start commenting. And so there's a judgment there about whether that is a decision, an informed decision you've made. No, I've changed my mind. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to give this information. Or is it the pressure of questioning? Is it that they've forgotten the advice? They've got confused, etc., etc. So you're helping the person to understand what their rights are. You're observing what the police are doing. Are they acting properly? Are they acting fairly? Are they respecting rights? And if they're not, you're taking it upstairs and informing a more senior officer, and generally ensuring that those rights are protected and respected. Let's zoom into the communication part of it. A lot of that work, I think, happens before the interview. So, Carl, let's say I'm your AA, you've been arrested for something. I don't just wander into an interview and say, Carl, says on your paperwork you've got ADHD, and I did a course on ADHD, and it says I need to do these 3 things. So those are the things I'm going to do. What's actually happened is, because you've got a right to a private consultation with me at any time, and I've asked you if you're happy to do that. We've had a conversation, we've built up some rapport. I've talked to you about you as a whole person, not you as a diagnosis. Talked to you a bit about what's going to happen, and asked you what's going to help you, Carl.
Yeah.
What do you need? I need the lights turning down. I need questions to be open. I need questions to be closed. I need it to go slow paced. I don't want to hear the same question over and over again. I've maybe also with your consent, spoken to liaison and diversion and healthcare, and they've given me some information as well. So I know you would know better than me what the list of things that are attached to ADHD are, and therefore what the list of things that would help would be. And of course we would train AAs on understanding different diagnoses, conditions, and the things you can kind of do around that. So we might think about attention and concentration, impulsivity, memory issues, hyperactivity, restlessness, emotional vulnerability, all those things. And we might make sure you understand your rights. We might make sure the police have made reasonable adjustments, like enough breaks, simplifying the language. Is there any medication you need access to? Do you need like a fidget toy, any sort of calming aids? Would be like keeping an eye on you in the interview, sitting side on, any signs of distress or confusion, interrupt the interview if we think, I don't think Carl, can I just check whether you understood that question? What did it mean to you? Do you need a break? Officer, I think you might be asking a bit of a leading question there, or you've asked him that 4 times, etc., etc. So those are things we can do. But the starting point, I think, is who is Carl? Not, this is an ADHD call out or an autism call out. Who is Carl? as a whole person in this particular circumstance, because also your needs might vary between the offence has just happened or it's historic, it's a pretty minor offence, it's a major offence. All those things can change the thing. So I mean, my question would go back to you, like, what would you, as Carl Mumford, what would help you?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And when you touch on reasonable adjustments there, do you find, or in your experience of speaking to AAs, that those recommendations and what is suggested, and they're, kind of your AAs, I say your, but you know what I mean, as
not mine, but yeah.
No, but like AAs in general, do they find that those recommendations are accepted or understood, or the custody officer or whoever's interviewing understands why those things are being applied? Because obviously under the Equality Act, reasonable adjustments are to be applied when you suspect someone has a disability, or someone meets the definition of being disabled. And I'm just thinking that, if the AA is suggesting that those adjustments are needed and they're not heeded, then is that, should that be challenged too as a, something that AA should go, right, actually, this person hasn't had adjustments through this process. Is this evidence gathering appropriate? Have we really done what we've done or supported this person enough to be interviewing them?
The answer is it's super variable. And I go back to what I said at the beginning about how much baggage we all bring with each other, bring with ourselves about what we see as vulnerable and not vulnerable, and the lack of tools and training and investment for police officers. Because the reality is, you might, the officer next to you might think, well, I've literally had officers say to me, the thing is, Chris, what you don't understand is ADHD is not real. What it is it's a thing that parents use because you need two things to get benefits, and so they just tack that one on. It's just naughty kids. And
I've met prison officers like that.
Say again?
I've met prison officers like that, and quite recently as well.
Yeah, well, the thing is, people get their information, like when there's a vacuum of proper information, people get their information from all sorts of different places, don't they? It's not, I don't think it's that they're setting out to necessarily be evil. It's just, I guess they're living a life where, for police officers, I think the way sometimes they see the world is through the lens of meeting loads of people at the worst point in their life, and they think everyone's lying to them, so everybody lies. Like, that is what people do, because if your experience is you're getting lied to all the time, you start to believe everyone's lying all the time, right? So David, I mean, you tell me, but do sometimes people lie for their own benefit? I think, in all circumstances, I think people do that, right?
Yeah.
No comment.
No comment. Do you want to take some legal advice before you answer that question? So I think in all walks of life, people dissemble, they twist, they sculpture what they want to say and what they want to don't say, what they want to not say in order to get an outcome that they want. It's a reality. And remember, none of us are under any requirement to inculpate ourselves in an offence, right? We don't. It's the job for the system to prove that we did something. It's not my job, So to go back to the question about do the police respond to the things that AAs say, I think the reality is that it depends. It depends on the AA. It depends on the officer. It depends on the officer's leaders in his or her organisation or their organisation. It depends on the AA's leadership as well. Is there a relationship above there? Has there been a conversation about why getting this right is not just, it's not about helping people get away with things. It's about making sure the system is fair. And that actually, when an AA says, oh, you need to make reasonable adjustments, it's not them being soft on crime. In fact, it's enabling you to do your job better and make your evidence more likely to be reliable and therefore admissible, and you can get
legal responsibility, isn't it, to do so?
So I think it's really variable, but in general, if you've got a scheme where there's good leadership and good respect, and the AA does a good job and is well respected, yes, I think.
How do you measure standards then, Chris? Who do you take feedback from? Do you take feedback from, sorry to give them a label, detainees,
Yeah.
or do you just listen to AAs?
Me personally, like as the national body.
Yeah.
So firstly, I should clarify that National Appropriate Adult Network is there to set standards and support people to meet them. We're not an inspector or a regulator, right? So my logic is that no teacher with a problem ever rang up Ofsted and said, everything is bad here, can you come and help? They don't do that, right? So we are a supportive network, although we do set the standards. From this year onwards, HMI probation is starting to inspect appropriate adult services for children.
Good.
Which is really good news. One thing we haven't talked about, but we might get onto, is that literally nobody is legally responsible for making appropriate adults for vulnerable adults available. And it can't be the police, because you cannot be an AA if you're a police officer, police employee, contracted by the police, under the control and direction of the police, right? Obviously, it needs to be totally independent.
Yeah.
But on the feedback thing and the kind of evaluating quality and effectiveness, those sorts of things, one thing that schemes have done a lot of has been like seeking to get feedback from people as they go through the process. There's a real challenge there, right? Because that could descend into like sad face, medium face, happy face level of kind of analysis. And also, if you've just had the worst day of your life, are you going to be able to differentiate out how horrible that experience was from like the AA's service level? Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. I think a lot of schemes have felt worried that that way of doing things is just sort of ticking a box a little bit and isn't really getting into the nitty gritty of it. So, I mean, you'll know, David, and I've engaged with Revolving Doors on this. Sometimes it needs a little bit of perspective to look back, but then you don't want too much perspective where there's too much distance from it where you don't know what's happening kind of right now. It's a really tricky thing. The way I would like to resolve that in large part is to make sure that we're always including people with lived experience in the group of people who are appropriate adults as part of our broader sense of diversity, which is, as we know, if you don't have diversity, you get blind spots, just stuff that you're not a bad person, you just didn't know it, you didn't know about it. And it's why I've consistently stood up for the fact that there would be no police vetting of appropriate adults. It's not the job of police to determine who are not appropriate adults. We would of course use the DBS system. Nobody wants an appropriate adult who's going to put a child or a vulnerable person at risk, obviously. But my personal belief is that if you've been through that process yourself, there's a level of understanding, potentially empathy. I mean, like, going through the thing doesn't automatically make you an empathetic person, but if you can combine empathy, knowledge, experience all together, then that makes you a really powerful package. And sort of to go back to the thing of like, do AAs make any difference? And you said that one didn't. If you're well trained, if you know what the purpose of your role is, if you know what your powers are, you know you've got a legal power to escalate it. You've got a legal power to insist on a lawyer, a legal power to interrupt interviews. If you know that stuff, you're in a much more powerful position than, let's say, well, bear in mind that the priority AA for a child is a parent, right? You can kind of understand where that comes from. And the parent, you would hope, has got a love and a care for their child, and also like a deep understanding. Go back to that ADHD point. Oh, you got a diagnosis, but one person's ADHD is not the same as somebody else's needs, right? It's not like a set of like list of things. So the parental AA has the advantage of knowing that particular person's needs and circumstances. What they don't have is any training at all about what their rights are. So they will often, and like, ultimately, it's then reliant, unless they've watched our video, which I'll put a little plug for on our website, unless they've watched that video, they are then reliant on the police officer to explain what their role is in safeguarding the person against the abuse of power by the police officer. So if that police officer is badly motivated, or more likely just doesn't know what an appropriate adult is because no one's really ever explained it to them, you can end up in a, well, your role is to sort of sit there in the corner and don't.
You've got emotion involved in that as well, haven't you? You've got a lot of emotion involved with the parent, and that can obviously cloud a lot of that responsibility in sense of you're trying to manage how you feel, what questions have been asked, and also look at things objectively to go, right, that has happened, or this needs to be different, or I need to challenge that. And that's difficult, isn't it?
And you've got the emotions of the person who's being supported about the fact that their parent's involved in it as well, right? So if you're in a police interview and the police are sliding evidence across the table for you, and you're 14 and your mum's in that interview and she's seeing that evidence, the thing you wrote in a WhatsApp chat, right? There's a lot of emotions going on there. A lot. I don't know if did you see the Netflix Adolescence documentary? So Stephen Graham, who's incredible actor, is playing the role of a parent. He's obviously a complete fish out of water. It's a drama, so like the whole of a murder investigation happens in like 40 minutes. It's completely divorced from reality. But what I think they did capture a lot was like the multiple. Stephen Graham like hardly moves his face, but you can see in his head he's calculating all these things about how do I feel about my child? Did he do it? Didn't he do it? What if he did do it? How do I feel about him? Am I defending him against the police, or is he the bad guy here? And I need to be like on the side of the police. And again, parents come with religious views or moral views or social views, and not necessarily with an understanding that we have an adversarial criminal justice system rather than a truth-finding criminal justice system, right? Which it's a thing that the lawyers understand really, really well, but parents wouldn't necessarily understand. So they're at a big disadvantage, apart from the fact that they know that individual and hopefully care about that individual.
Talking of plugs, Chris, are there enough AAs about? And if not, what an opportunity for you to actually get people to apply. So how do people become an AA? Especially if there's people listening right now who want to become an AA after listening to this.
The quick answer is no, there aren't enough appropriate adults. And I'm speaking of that at a time when it used to be that 2.7% of adults were recorded as needing an AA. We've got that up to 9%, but the data really suggests that vulnerability levels, the things that would be classified as a reason to suspect vulnerability, are probably quite a lot higher in the group of people going through. If we're all honest with each other, it's probably more like 40% rather than 9%. And the police are getting better and better at identifying it. And if they do what we're asking, which is get better, then that number's going to go up. So the demand level goes up even more. Even now we're struggling with having enough AAs, and reality is people are spending 10 and a half, 11 hours per custody episode on average, and we're struggling to maybe cover 2.5, 3 hours of that. Really struggling. So if people want to become an appropriate adult, they can I say we've got the arrangements are different across the country. So for children, there's always going to be a scheme in your area, and that is the responsibility of your youth justice service in your area. So you can contact the council, contact the youth justice service. They may use their own staff, they may pay sessional staff, they may use volunteers, or they may commission a service like a charity or whatever to run that with volunteers or sessional staff, right? But for children, you can always go to the youth justice service and say, what are the arrangements in this area? For adults, it's a bit more complicated. It used to always be local authority social care, used to be part of social work. And for the obvious financial reasons that we're all aware of, I guess, local authorities have been just like dominoes pulling out of providing and funding that service because there's no statutory duty. And if you've got a massive black hole in your purse, and something's non-statutory, then, you cancel it. So sometimes it's the council. Oftentimes now, it's the Police and Crime Commissioner that has set up a scheme, commissioned a scheme, so you can go there. But ultimately, you can come to our website, which is appropriateadult.org.uk. You can have a look in our who's a member of ours and look by the region. You can email us if you need to. to ask. But yeah, have a think about, is this a thing I would want to do on a voluntary basis? Is it a thing I would want to get paid for? But we can certainly, point out what areas need that. And people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of backgrounds. Really important that it's a diverse group of people, I think.
Yeah, I've just popped the link to the website in the chat as well for people to have a look at. So
That's cool.
Consider plug done. But the
Thanks, David, for setting that one up.
So yeah, there's a couple of people who've sent some questions in, and we're coming up to the hour. We've got 9 minutes left, and I thought they'd just raise some key points.
Yeah,
and one that I was interested in a bit more, sort of delving into it, is Matt's asked, recognizing, the recognition that neurodivergent individuals may mask difficulties or present in ways that don't fit traditional vulnerability markers. I guess that's more of a statement, but how do AAs, what training do AAs have to understand that? But also, would you expect an AA to raise that as a point to police?
Yeah, I think the first question.
Sorry, Chris, can I quickly jump in first from a lived experience perspective on that one? Because I've got actually masking written down. Once I was arrested and I was driven to the custody suite and I'm in front of the custody sergeant, I will start masking. As I say, I will start acting in a way that will get me either out of that police station quick enough or sent on to court, on to prison, if that's going to be the case. So I would be a completely different person in front of the custody sergeant as I was in the police car that just pulled up in the custody car park.
Yeah.
So it would have been very difficult in some. I'm not saying it happened all the time. In the majority of times it did. But in the times, I forgot what I was going to say. Then it just went. So yeah, how kind of would they get past that? I suppose. How would they? You can't tell if someone's masking.
My question to you is, why are you masking? How is that serving you? Because you're masking for a reason, right? You're logically masking for a purpose, to save yourself, to improve your circumstances. Why are you?
I learned a long time ago from an older friend of mine when we were arrested together about behaving in the police station, because you end up getting 2 dinners, not 1. You'll get 3 cups of coffee instead of a cup of water. Do you know what I mean? It's about playing that game.
Yeah.
And that game for me began in front of the custody sergeant. The 2 nicest people the two people that I was nicest to in the police station were the custody sergeant and the jailer, because obviously it'd be the jailer that gets you the things that you need.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting case of a guy who was acquitted of murder after 30 years recently, Oliver Campbell, who some of the writing around it is that as a black man, he grew up as a black child, sort of in care, and he learned a certain set of behaviours that in an institution were going to get him what he needed and avoid what he really didn't want, right? So he learned to be kind of quite compliant and agree to things and what have you. And that compliance is what ended up having him basically admit to a murder that he didn't do, because he was back in that institutionalized kind of context. Quickly, because I'm aware of time, what I would say is I think the first question is, how does policing and the health bits around it, how do they identify it, right? Because we are not, our appropriate adults job is not to like medically assess people or whatever, right? Liaison and diversion, I'm a big fan of it, to the extent that it can identify what people need and then inform the system to make the changes it needs to make, right? So AAs are not speech and language therapists, forensic psychologists, forensic psychiatrists. So they're not going to claim some skill level that they haven't got. That's dangerous. That is dangerous to do that. What you need is information sharing more than that. So that's the big challenge. With there's a piece of work the National Police Chiefs Council is doing at the moment, which is to test and then potentially roll out a brand new approach to risk assessment in police custody, which doesn't just, well, the point I've been making for a long time is the current one focuses on physical risk, right? Are you going to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else? And it completely misses what I would call psycho-legal risks. And to the point I've said to police officers, well, to prove the point, I've sort of said, well, if you took somebody into police custody, manacled them to the wall, like with their arms apart, right? They can't cut their wrists now, can they? So you've solved all the risks. Oh, well, that's silly, Chris. Yeah, of course it's silly, because you're abusing them, right? And then it has a psychological impact. But are we picking up those psychological impacts in there? Or we're not. So that's the first one. In terms of AA training, obviously all the parents are not trained. Anybody who's acting on an ad hoc basis because they're someone's social worker or whatever will have the social work training, but not necessarily the AA training. People coming from an appropriate adult scheme will have training. It's up to the individual scheme as to what that training includes. We've just launched an official sort of standardized national training course, which would of course go through all the kind of different conditions, talk about masking, etc., etc.
Brilliant.
But again, it's not our role to diagnose people. And to be honest, David, the reason I was asking David why you would be masking, the thing in my head is, the key to it is, do you trust me? I'm there as your appropriate adult. I've spent time with you. We've built a relationship. I've explained to you why I'm there, what I can do, what I can't do. Have I given you enough reason to trust me? Have I given you enough reason to start to wind the mask back? Best we can do. But realistically, it's naive to think that a lifetime of masking is going to suddenly drop away when you've met somebody for like half an hour, right? So you've got to be do your best to build a relationship of trust, but also be realistic that if the healthcare hasn't picked it up, if the liaison diversion hasn't picked it up, the police haven't picked it up, maybe you'll start to see more, maybe. But you've got to always be aware that you might not be getting the full picture, because people have got really good reasons to not give you the whole picture when they've just met you.
Yeah, no, definitely really key points, Chris. Wow, I think we always say this, we need more than an hour, but you know, there's so much useful information within that, Chris. Really appreciate the time you've given us this afternoon to understand a bit more about appropriate adults and delve into that conversation. I'd love to, you know, one day explore more around the kind of what best practice communication looks like, and how we really understand what, you know, that masking element, and also how we, you know, improve the experience that people have in interview rooms, and what goes on in an interview room, and challenge that.
Well, I would say you guys are really probably better placed than me to answer like those questions, and I would extend the invite to do the opposite, and for you guys to come and do something with appropriate adults nationally to talk about exactly that. Would love to have you to be listening rather than talking about this subject.
Yeah, no, that'd be brilliant, Chris. Thank you. So yeah, it's just one final thing. What would you like people to take away from this session? You know, be it training or just a message around AAs. What would you like them to take away? I know it's a bit of an open-ended question, but
I would like everyone, no matter what perspective you're coming from, to go look at appropriateadult.org.uk. There's resources for polices and nurses on what PACE vulnerability is and how you negotiate that. There's resources for family members on the video around what the AA role is. And there's a lot of information to kind of learn from that. But and the other thing I take away is, please support us in our request to this government and previous governments for it to be someone's legal responsibility to provide the appropriate adults, right? It's just silly from everyone's perspective to have a system that says you, the police, must apply this safeguard. You can't be the ones providing the safeguard, and also no one's responsible for providing the safeguard. And then we're gonna Then we're gonna blame you for the fact that you've not used it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. So those are the points.
That's excellent, Chris. Thank you so much, and David, thank you as well for, you know, it's always bringing us all together to have a conversation about this.
Nice one, Chris.
Yeah, nice one, Chris. Thank you. I'm sorry my camera hasn't been on. It's better than that, than your eyes going all funny from it flickering so much.
Next headroom.
There's always something, isn't there, that goes wrong tech-wise, but yeah.
It said in the chat, it never goes perfect, but then we always end up with a brilliant show at the end of it anyway, so that's all that matters. So, yeah.
No, I really value the time you've given us, Chris, and thank you to everyone that's joined us.
Thank you, Chris.
Cheers.
See you again soon. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you later.